The thunderous crack of a whip echoed through the dusty air as the last wagon of the McClellan train disappeared over the horizon, leaving nothing but swirling dust and the fading sounds of wooden wheels against the rugged Montana terrain. Katherine Zimmerman stared in disbelief, her heart pounding against her ribs as the realization dawned upon her they had left without her. Her knuckles turned white as she clutched her reticule, the only possession she had carried into Holloway's trading post just 15 minutes earlier. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. "No, no, no." Katherine hiked up her skirts and ran toward the trail, her boots kicking up dirt as she sprinted after the wagons that were now mere specks in the distance. The hot summer sun of 1876 beat down mercilessly as she pushed forward, lungs burning, until she finally stopped, doubled over and gasping for breath. The wagon train was gone along with all her worldly possessions and her ticket to a new life in Oregon. "Miss, you'll catch your death running like that in this heat," called a gruff voice from behind her. Katherine turned to see Mr. Holloway standing at the entrance to his trading post, wiping his hands on a dirty cloth. His weathered face showed genuine concern beneath his gray whiskers. "They left me," she managed between breaths. "My family. The McClellan wagon train, they left me behind." Holloway frowned. "That's Jeremiah McClellan's train, heading to Oregon Territory." When Katherine nodded, the shopkeeper shook his head. "Mighty strange." Jeremiah's usually careful about accounting for his people. "I only stepped inside to purchase some ribbons," Katherine explained, fighting back tears of frustration. "My cousin Sarah's birthday is next week, and I thought—" Her voice trailed off as the magnitude of her situation became clear. She was stranded at her remote trading post in Montana Territory with nothing but the clothes on her back and a few coins in her reticule. "Well, you can't stay out here in the sun. Come on back inside," Holloway said kindly. "We'll figure something out." The interior of the trading post offered blessed relief from the heat, though the mixture of scents leather, tobacco, coffee, and various dried goods did little to calm Katherine's churning stomach. She perched uncertainly on a wooden stool while Holloway poured her a cup of water. "There's a ranch hand who rode in this morning," Holloway said as Katherine sipped the tepid water. "Quiet sort, but reliable from what I hear. Works for the Pine Ridge outfit about 20 miles west. He might be willing to help." Before Katherine could respond, the door swung open. A tall figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the bright sunlight. As the door closed behind him, Katherine could make out a man dressed in trail-worn clothes, faded denim, a cotton shirt rolled at the sleeves, and a dust-covered hat that shadowed his features. "Mr. Holloway," the man greeted, his voice deep and even. He tipped his hat toward Katherine with a brief nod. "Madam." "Ah, Hawkins. Just the man I was mentioning," Holloway said. "This is Miss Katherine Zimmerman," she supplied, straightening her posture despite her distress. "Miss Zimmerman has found herself in quite a predicament," Holloway continued. "The McClellan wagon train has left her behind, and she needs to catch up with them." The man called Hawkins removed his hat, revealing dark hair and intense eyes that studied Katherine carefully. "Henry Prescott," he introduced himself with a slight bow of his head. "Most folks call me Hawkins. Mr. Prescott, I would be deeply grateful for any assistance you might offer," Katherine said, attempting to maintain her composure despite the desperate circumstances. Henry Prescott considered her for a long moment. "The McClellan train left how long ago?" "Not more than 20 minutes," Katherine replied quickly. He nodded thoughtfully. "They'll be making slow progress. Wagons can't move fast in this terrain." He turned to Holloway. "I need supplies if I'm going to track them. Extra water, provisions." Katherine's heart leapt with hope. "You'll help me. Can't leave a lady stranded," Henry replied matter-of-factly. He turned back to Holloway. I'll need to borrow your fastest horse as well. Mine needs rest after the journey from Pine Ridge. Holloway nodded. Take the bay mare. She's swift and sure-footed. I'll gather what you need. He disappeared into the back of the store, leaving Katherine alone with the cowboy. Thank you, Mr. Prescott, Katherine said, her voice steadier now that a solution seemed possible. I can pay you for your trouble once I rejoin my family. Henry Prescott shook his head. No need for payment, Miss Zimmerman. Helping folks in trouble is just what's done out here. He studied her appraisingly. Can you ride? Katherine nodded. Yes, though I'm more accustomed to side saddle than you'll have to ride astride, he interrupted. We need to move quickly, and side saddle won't do for the terrain we'll be covering. Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks at the impropriety, but she nodded her agreement. This was no time for social niceties. She needed to reach her family before they got too far ahead or, worse, encountered trouble without her knowing her fate. Within half an hour, Holloway had provided them with provisions, water, and 2 horses, his bay mare for Katherine, and a sturdy black gelding for Henry. Katherine had exchanged her impractical traveling dress for a spare set of trousers and a shirt Holloway's wife kept at the trading post. The clothing was ill-fitting but would make riding much easier. I've sent word with a passing rider to Utica, Holloway told them as they mounted. If you don't catch up to the train, head there. It's the nearest proper town, about 30 miles east. Henry nodded his thanks, then turned to Katherine. Stay close behind me. The trail is clear for now, but if we lose sight of the wagons, tracking becomes more complicated. With those words, he urged his horse forward and Katherine followed suit, the bay mare responding easily to her commands. As they left the trading post behind, Katherine cast one last glance back at the small wooden building that had unwittingly become the site of her abandonment, and, perhaps, the beginning of an unexpected journey. They rode hard for the first hour, the trail still visible with fresh wheel marks and disturbed earth. Henry kept a steady pace, occasionally looking back to ensure Katherine was managing. To his surprise, she rode well, maintaining her seat with practiced ease despite the unaccustomed riding style. You handle yourself well on horseback, he commented when they slowed to give the horses a brief rest. My father insisted I learn, Katherine replied, taking a small sip from her canteen. He said a proper Montana girl should know how to ride, even if society preferred to see her perched delicately on a side saddle. Henry's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Your father sounds like a sensible man. He was, Katherine said softly. He passed 2 years ago. Pneumonia took him after a harsh winter. My condolences, Henry said, his voice genuinely sympathetic. Is that why you're heading to Oregon? Fresh start, Katherine nodded. My aunt and uncle invited me to join them. After Father died, there wasn't much left for me in Missouri. Our farm went to pay his debts. She looked out at the vast Montana landscape. I thought Oregon might offer new possibilities. It's beautiful country, Henry agreed. Different from this, but beautiful in its own way. He scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowing. We should keep moving. The wagons have a good head start. They continued their pursuit, the terrain becoming more challenging as they moved westward. The trail wound through rugged hills and across shallow streams. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising an evening storm. We need to push harder, Henry called back to Katherine. That storm will wash away the trail if it hits before we catch up to them. Katherine nodded her understanding, urging her horse to a faster pace. They crested a hill, and Henry pulled his horse to an abrupt stop. Katherine reined in beside him, following his gaze to the valley below. In the distance, perhaps 2 miles ahead, The wagon train was visible, a line of white canvas covers against the golden-brown landscape. "We've found them," Katherine breathed, relief flooding through her. "Not quite caught up yet," Henry cautioned. "And that storm's moving faster than I'd like." As if to emphasize his point, a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. The horses shifted nervously beneath them. "Let's go," Katherine urged. "We can reach them before the storm hits." Henry nodded, and they set off down the hill at a controlled canter, mindful of the increasingly rocky terrain. They had closed half the distance when the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly turning into a steady downpour. The sky darkened ominously, and another crack of thunder, much closer now, caused Katherine's mare to sidestep nervously. "Easy," she soothed, patting the horse's wet neck. Ahead, the wagon train had stopped, circling for protection against the storm. Henry and Katherine were now close enough to see individual figures moving between the wagons, securing animals and belongings against the worsening weather. "They've stopped for the storm," Katherine called over the rising wind. "We can reach them now." They pushed forward through the rain, now less than a quarter-mile from the nearest wagon. Katherine's heart pounded with anticipation and relief. Just a few more minutes and she would be back with her family, this ordeal nothing more than an unpleasant memory. A blindingly bright flash of lightning struck a tree not 50 yards to their right, followed instantly by a deafening crack of thunder. Katherine's mare reared in terror, nearly unseating her. She managed to stay mounted, but the frightened animal bolted, veering away from the wagon train and toward a stand of trees to the south. "Katherine!" Henry shouted, turning his own mount to follow. Katherine pulled desperately at the reins, trying to regain control as the panicked horse galloped wildly through the rain. The animal swerved suddenly to avoid a fallen log, and this time Katherine couldn't maintain her seat. She was thrown from the saddle, hitting the ground hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. She rolled several times before coming to rest against the base of a pine tree, pain shooting through her right ankle. For a moment, she lay still, dazed and struggling to breathe. The rain pelted her face as she looked up at the stormy sky through the pine branches. Then Henry was there, kneeling beside her, his face tight with concern. "Don't move," he instructed, his hands gently probing her limbs for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "My ankle," Katherine gasped, finally finding her breath. "I think it might be twisted, but nothing else feels broken." Henry carefully examined her ankle, his touch surprisingly gentle for such weathered hands. "Swollen, but I don't think it's broken. Still, you shouldn't put weight on it." He looked around, assessing their situation. The rain was still falling heavily, and through the trees, the wagon train was barely visible in the distance. "We need shelter," he decided. "There's a small overhang just beyond those trees. We can wait out the worst of the storm there." Before Katherine could protest, Henry had lifted her into his arms, carrying her with surprising ease through the rain toward the shelter he'd spotted. Katherine's cheeks burned at the impropriety of their situation, but necessity overrode social convention. The overhang proved to be a small rocky outcropping, providing just enough shelter to keep off the worst of the rain. Henry set Katherine down carefully on a relatively dry patch of ground, then removed his duster and draped it around her shoulders. "The storm shouldn't last long," he said, settling beside her. "High country storms like this blow through quickly." Katherine nodded, pulling the coat tighter around her. Despite the summer heat, the rain had chilled her thoroughly. "What about the horses?" "Your mare ran off, but my gelding is ground-tied nearby. He's weathered worse storms than this." Henry pulled a small flask from his saddlebag. "Here, take a sip. It'll warm you up." Katherine accepted the flask cautiously, taking a tiny sip. The whiskey burned its way down her throat, but the warmth that followed was welcome. "What about the wagon train?" she asked, passing the flask back to him. "Won't they continue once the storm passes?" "Most likely," Henry admitted. "But don't worry, I'm still going to get you back to them." "Why are you helping me?" Katherine asked suddenly. "You don't know me. You had your own business at the trading post." Henry took a slow sip from the flask before answering. "Out here we look out for each other. It's the code of the West, I suppose. Leave someone in trouble and next time it might be you needing help." He paused, looking out at the falling rain. "Besides, my business with Holloway was just delivering a message. Nothing that can't wait." They fell silent for a while, listening to the storm. The rain gradually lessened, and the thunder moved off into the distance. "Tell me about your family," Henry said eventually. "The ones in the wagon train." "My Aunt Martha, she's my father's sister, and her husband, Uncle Josiah. They're 3 children, Sarah, who's turning 16 next week, and the twins, Robert and Richard, who are 12. Katherine smiled fondly. "They're good people. Uncle Josiah was a carpenter in Missouri, but he's hoping to establish a larger workshop in Oregon." "And your mother?" Henry asked. "She passed when I was 8. Childbirth complications. The baby, my brother, didn't survive either." Katherine looked down at her hands. "It was just father and me after that until 2 years ago." Henry nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Life out west is hard on women," he said quietly. "My own mother died young as well." The personal revelation surprised Katherine. Henry Prescott didn't seem the type to share his history easily. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said sincerely. He acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "The rain's letting up. We should check that ankle again before we move on." Katherine extended her leg, wincing as Henry gently removed her boot and examined the swollen ankle. "The swelling's not too bad," he pronounced. "I'm going to bind it, and then we'll see about finding that mare of yours before we continue." From his saddlebag, he produced a clean bandana which he wrapped firmly but gently around Katherine's ankle. His hands were calloused but deft, speaking of years of practical experience with injuries in the field. "There," he said, finishing the binding. "That should provide some support. Let's get you standing." With Henry's assistance, Katherine rose to her feet, testing her weight cautiously on the injured ankle. It hurt, but she could bear it. "I can ride," she assured him, seeing the doubt in his eyes. "We need to catch up to my family." Henry studied her for a moment, then nodded. "We'll ride double until we find your mare. The gelding can handle both our weights for a short distance." The rain had stopped entirely now, though gray clouds still hung low in the sky. Henry helped Katherine mount his gelding, then swung up behind her. The proximity was uncomfortably intimate. Katherine could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, but there was no alternative. Henry kept a respectful distance as much as possible, holding the reins on either side of her without actually embracing her. They rode slowly through the trees, calling for the bay mare. After about 20 minutes of searching, they spotted her grazing calmly in a small clearing, as if she hadn't nearly killed Katherine with her panic. "Animals," Henry muttered with a shake of his head. "Terrified 1 minute, perfectly content the next." He helped Katherine dismount, then retrieved the mare, checking her over for any injuries. Finding none, he assisted Katherine onto the bay's back, making sure she was securely seated before mounting his own horse again. "The wagon train will have moved on," he said, orienting himself. "But they won't have gone far in this weather. If we push, we can catch them before nightfall." They set off at a steady pace, following the clear tracks left by the wagons in the rain-softened earth. The storm clouds were breaking up now, allowing shafts of late-afternoon sunlight to streak across the landscape. Despite her discomfort, Katherine couldn't help but admire the wild beauty of the Montana countryside, the mountains visible in the distance beneath a clearing sky. "It's beautiful here," she commented as they rode side by side. "Different from Missouri, more untamed." "That's what I love about it," Henry replied, surveying the landscape with obvious appreciation. "There's a freedom in this country that you won't find back east." "Is that why you came west?" Katherine asked. Henry was quiet for a moment before answering. "Partly. I fought in the war Confederate side. After it ended, there wasn't much left for me in Tennessee. Came west in '66, worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the Army, settled in Montana Territory 4 years ago." Katherine studied him with new interest. He would have been young during the war, barely more than a boy. Yet there was a depth to his gaze that spoke of experiences far beyond his years. She guessed him to be around 30 now, though the weathered quality of his skin made it difficult to be certain. "And now you work at Pine Ridge Ranch," she prompted. "For now," he confirmed. "It's good work, though I've been saving to buy my own spread someday." They continued riding through the afternoon, following the increasingly fresh wagon tracks. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Henry pointed ahead to where dust rose in the distance. "There they are," he said. "Less than an hour ahead of us now." Relief flooded through Katherine. Soon she would be back with her family, this misadventure behind her. Yet mixed with the relief was an unexpected twinge of regret. Once she rejoined the wagon train, she would part ways with Henry Prescott, likely never to see him again. The thought troubled her more than it should have. As they drew closer to the wagon train, Katherine could make out individual wagons. They had stopped for the night, forming the familiar circle that provided protection and community. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and figures moved about, setting up camp for the evening. "They've stopped for the night," Henry observed. "That's fortunate. We'll reach them before they move out tomorrow." Katherine nodded, suddenly nervous about facing her family. Would they have noticed her absence yet? Had they been worried, or had they simply assumed she was riding in another wagon? The sun was setting as they approached the wagon circle. A man standing watch spotted them and raised a rifle cautiously. "Who goes there?" he called. "Katherine Zimmerman and Henry Prescott," Henry replied clearly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "Miss Zimmerman was left behind at Holloway's trading post this morning." The guard lowered his rifle, recognition dawning on his face. "Miss Katherine." "Lord Almighty, your aunt's been beside herself with worry." He turned and shouted toward the camp. "It's Miss Katherine. She's back." Activity erupted in the camp as people emerged from around wagons and cookfires. A middle-aged woman broke free from the group, running toward them with her skirts hiked up unceremoniously. "Katherine, oh, my dear girl." "Aunt Martha," Katherine said with relief as Henry helped her dismount. She hobbled forward into her aunt's embrace, wincing slightly as she put weight on her injured ankle. "You're hurt," Martha exclaimed, noticing Katherine's limp. "What happened? And where have you been? We've been frantic since we realized you weren't with us. When did you notice I was missing?" Katherine asked. "Not until we stopped for the noon meal," Martha admitted, looking ashamed. "I thought you were riding with Sarah in the Johnsons' wagon and she thought you were with me. It wasn't until we all gathered that we realized." Her voice broke. "Josiah wanted to turn back immediately, but Mr. McClellan said it was too dangerous with the storm coming. He promised we'd send riders back at first light tomorrow." Katherine squeezed her aunt's hand. "It's all right. Mr. Prescott found me and brought me back." Martha turned grateful eyes to Henry, who stood awkwardly holding the reins of both horses. "Thank you, sir. We are forever in your debt." By now, a small crowd had gathered, including Katherine's uncle and cousins. Josiah stepped forward, extending his hand to Henry. "You have my deepest gratitude, Mr. Prescott, if there's anything we can do to repay your kindness." "No need for payment," Henry said, shaking the offered hand. "Just glad to help." "At least stay the night," Josiah insisted. "Share our fire and food. It's getting dark, and there's no sense in you riding back to wherever you're headed in the night." Henry hesitated, glancing at Katherine, who found herself hoping he would accept. "That's kind of you, sir. If it's no trouble, I would appreciate a meal before I head back toward Utica in the morning." "No trouble at all," Josiah assured him. "Robert, Richard, take Mr. Prescott's horses and see they're watered and fed." The twin boys, nearly identical with their sandy hair and freckled faces, eagerly took the reins from Henry and led the horses away, peppering him with questions about his journey that he answered with patient amusement. Martha supported Katherine as they moved toward their wagon. "Let's get that ankle seen to properly," she fussed. "And you must tell me everything that happened. How did you come to be left behind? And these clothes? Where is your dress?" Katherine smiled at her aunt's flurry of concerns, so normal and comforting after the strange day she had experienced. She allowed herself to be settled on a stool near the family's cook fire, where Martha examined her ankle with experienced hands. "It's just a sprain," she pronounced. "A few days of rest should see it improved. Sarah, fetch my medicine box from the wagon." As her cousin hurried to obey, Katherine glanced across the fire to where Henry was speaking with her uncle and Mr. McClellan, the wagon train leader. In the flickering firelight, she could study him more clearly than she had on the trail. His features were strong and well-defined, his expression serious as he described their journey. There was an integrity about him that Katherine found compelling. As if sensing her gaze, Henry glanced in her direction, their eyes meeting briefly across the fire. Katherine looked away quickly, focusing on her aunt's ministrations as Martha applied a pungent-smelling salve to her ankle and rewrapped it more skillfully than Henry had managed. Dinner was a simple but hearty affair: beans, salt pork, and biscuits, with coffee boiled strong and black. Henry ate quietly, answering questions about the territory ahead, but otherwise keeping to himself. Katherine noticed how the other men deferred to his knowledge of the land, listening attentively to his advice about water sources and potential dangers. After the meal, as people began settling in for the night, Katherine found herself alone with Henry for a moment near the fire. Her cousins had been called to their bedrolls, and the adults were engaged in conversation on the other side of the camp. "Thank you again for bringing me back," Katherine said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been at the trading post." Henry looked up from the coffee cup he'd been staring into. "You would have been fine. Holloway would have arranged something, but I'm glad I could help." He hesitated, then added, "You handled yourself well out there. Not many women would have managed that ride with a sprained ankle." Coming from the reserved cowboy, Katherine recognized this as high praise. "I've had to be resourceful since Father died," she said simply. Henry nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Oregon will be good for you, I think. It's a place where a resourceful person can build something worthwhile." "What about you?" Katherine asked. "Will you stay in Montana? For now, like I said, I'm saving for my own place." He looked out into the darkness beyond the firelight. "There's good land north of here, near the Milk River. Tough winters, but fine grazing country." "I hope you get your ranch," Katherine said sincerely. Henry's gaze returned to her, something unreadable in his expression. "I hope you find what you're looking for in Oregon, Miss Zimmerman." The way he said her name sent an unexpected warmth through Katherine. Before she could respond, Martha called her from the wagon. "I should go," Katherine said, rising carefully. "Good night, Mr. Prescott." "Good night, Miss Zimmerman," Henry replied, standing politely as she limped away. Katherine slept fitfully that night, her ankle throbbing and her mind full of the day's events. When she finally rose at dawn, she was disappointed though not surprised to learn that Henry had already departed. He had left before first light, according to the morning watch, saying only that he had business back in Utica and thanking them for their hospitality. "A good man, that Mr. Prescott," Josiah commented as they broke their fast. "Quiet but solid. The kind you want beside you in trouble." Katherine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She felt oddly bereft at Henry's departure, which made no sense. He had been a chance-met stranger who had done his duty by returning her to her family. That he had gone on his way was only natural. The wagon train resumed its journey westward, with Katherine riding in her aunt and uncle's wagon to rest her ankle. Day followed day as they made their slow progress toward Oregon territory. The land changed around them, mountains giving way to high desert, then to greener landscapes as they approached their destination. Katherine's ankle healed, but a strange restlessness remained within her. She found herself scanning the horizon sometimes, as if expecting to see a lone rider approaching. Each time they passed through a settlement or trading post, she would look for a familiar tall figure among the strangers. It was foolishness, she knew. Henry Prescott had returned to his life in Montana, and she was heading toward a new life in Oregon. Yet the memory of those intense eyes and that rare half-smile lingered. 3 weeks after the incident at Holloway's trading post, the McClellan wagon train reached its destination, the fertile Willamette Valley of Oregon Territory. The Zimmerman family settled on a promising piece of land outside Salem, where Josiah quickly established his carpentry business. Katherine helped her aunt with the household and the younger children, trying to embrace the new life she had sought. Salem in 1876 was a growing community, with opportunities Katherine had never known in Missouri. There were social gatherings, a small library, even occasional theatrical performances. Young men called upon her, the son of a neighboring farmer, a clerk from the mercantile, a widower with 2 small children who needed a mother. Katherine was polite to them all but found reasons to decline their serious attentions. Her aunt watched with growing concern. "You're 23, Katherine," Martha said gently one evening as they sat mending by lamplight. "A woman alone in this country needs protection. These are good men who call on you." "I know, Aunt Martha," Katherine replied, focusing on her needlework. "I'm grateful for your concern, but I'm not ready to settle." Martha studied her niece carefully. "Is there someone else? Someone back in Missouri, perhaps?" Katherine shook her head. "No, no one in Missouri." The emphasis was slight, but Martha caught it. "Somewhere else, then?" Katherine hesitated. "No, not really, just a memory, I suppose." Martha nodded wisely. "Ah, the cowboy who brought you back to us." Katherine's startled glance confirmed her aunt's suspicion. "I saw how you looked at him," Martha said kindly, "and how he looked at you when he thought no one was watching." "It doesn't matter," Katherine said, setting down her mending. "He's in Montana and we're here. We barely knew each other." "Sometimes it doesn't take long to know what matters," Martha replied. "Your uncle and I had known each other just 2 weeks when we decided to marry. That was 20 years ago, and I've never regretted a day." Katherine smiled at the romantic story she'd heard many times. "This is different." Mr. Prescott was just doing what any decent man would do, helping someone in trouble. Martha patted her hand. "If you say so, dear, but don't close your heart to possibilities just because they seem unlikely." The conversation stayed with Katherine through the following days. Was she truly holding on to a foolish infatuation with a man she had known for less than 2 days? It seemed absurd when examined rationally. Yet whenever she tried to summon interest in one of her local suitors, she found herself making unfavorable comparisons to a certain dark-haired cowboy. Autumn came to the Willamette Valley, painting the trees in brilliant colors and bringing the harvest season. Katherine threw herself into the work, helping with the apple picking and preserving, hoping physical exhaustion would quiet her restless thoughts. She was returning from delivering a basket of her aunt's preserves to a neighbor when she saw the rider approaching their small farmhouse. The late afternoon sun silhouetted his figure, making it impossible to see his features clearly. Something about his posture in the saddle caused Katherine's heart to quicken. As the rider drew closer, Katherine stopped in her tracks, the empty basket clutched tightly in her hands. It couldn't be, but it was. Henry Prescott reined his horse to a stop a few yards from where Katherine stood. He looked much as she remembered, perhaps a bit leaner, his skin more tanned from summer work. He removed his hat, revealing hair that had grown a bit longer since she'd last seen him. "Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her, his voice just as she remembered it. "Mr. Prescott," Katherine replied, finding her voice with difficulty. "This is unexpected." "For me as well," he admitted, dismounting with fluid grace. He held the reins loosely, standing before her with an uncharacteristic uncertainty. "I meant to continue on to Salem, ask around for your family there." "How did you know where to find us?" Katherine asked, still struggling to believe he was actually standing before her. "I didn't exactly. I knew your uncle was a carpenter, heading to the Willamette Valley. Asked at every settlement along the way until I found someone who knew of a Zimmerman who worked with wood." He shifted slightly. "Took longer than I expected." "You've come from Montana?" Katherine asked, trying to make sense of his presence. Henry nodded. "Left Pine Ridge 6 weeks ago." "But why?" The question escaped before Katherine could consider its boldness. Henry looked directly at her then, his gaze unwavering. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you." The simple honesty of his statement took Katherine's breath away. She had imagined this moment in so many different ways, but the reality of Henry standing before her, admitting he had crossed hundreds of miles because she had occupied his thoughts, was overwhelming. "I know it's presumptuous," Henry continued when she remained silent. "We barely know each other. You might be married by now or promised to someone. If that's the case, I'll ride away and not trouble you further." "I'm not married," Katherine said quickly, "nor promised to anyone." Relief flickered across Henry's face, followed by a return of uncertainty. "I'm not a man of means, Katherine. I have some savings, enough to buy a small spread maybe, but it would be a hard life, at least at first." Katherine took a step toward him, her heart racing. "Are you asking me something, Mr. Prescott?" "Henry," he corrected softly. "And yes, I suppose I am. I'm asking if you might consider a life with me. Not here, I've seen enough of Oregon to know it's not for me, but back in Montana. There's land available near Utica that would suit cattle well." "You want me to return to Montana," Katherine clarified, needing to be certain she understood. "Yes." Henry took a deep breath. "I know it's asking a lot. You've just settled here with your family, but I had to ask. These past months, I've found myself remembering how you handled yourself on that ride, how you never complained despite your pain, how you—" he broke off, seeming embarrassed by his uncharacteristic eloquence. "I just know that I want a woman like you beside me." Katherine looked up into his weathered face, seeing vulnerability beneath the strong exterior. This man had ridden hundreds of miles on the chance that she might return his feelings. The realization both humbled and exhilarated her. "I would need time," she said carefully, "to speak with my family. To be certain." Hope kindled in Henry's eyes. "Of course, I've taken a room in Salem. I can wait as long as necessary for your answer." From the direction of the farmhouse, Katherine heard her name being called. Aunt Martha had spotted them from the window. You should come inside, Katherine said. Meet my family properly. Stay for dinner at least. Henry hesitated. Are you sure that would be welcome? I don't want to impose. You tracked me across 2 territories twice now, Katherine said with a small smile. I think you can manage dinner with my relatives. That earned her one of Henry's rare smiles, transforming his serious face. When you put it that way, I suppose I can. The days that followed were filled with conversations with her aunt and uncle, with Henry, and with herself. Katherine found herself drawn to the quiet strength of the cowboy, his straightforward manner, and his clear vision for the future. When they walked together along the creek that bordered her uncle's property, he spoke of the land he hoped to purchase, describing it with such vividness that Katherine could almost see it. It faces south, with a creek running year-round along the eastern border, he told her. Good water is everything in cattle country. There's a natural hollow that would shelter a house from the worst of the winter winds, with a view of the mountains to the west. The previous owner built a small cabin, just 2 rooms, but solid. We could expand it over time. We? Katherine asked softly. Henry met her gaze steadily. Yes, we, if you'll have me. A week after Henry's arrival, Katherine made her decision. They were sitting on the porch of her uncle's house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Her aunt and uncle had tactfully retreated indoors, leaving them alone with their thoughts. I'll go with you to Montana, Katherine said, breaking the companionable silence. Henry turned to her, surprise and joy evident in his expression. You're certain it won't be an easy life? I'm certain, Katherine confirmed. I came west looking for a new beginning, for something that felt right. I thought I would find it in Oregon, but maybe it was Montana all along. She smiled at him. Or maybe it was you. Henry reached for her hand, holding it gently in his larger one. I promise to do everything in my power to make sure you never regret this decision. I know you will, Katherine said, confidence in her voice. That's why I can make it. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Salem, with Katherine's family and a few neighbors in attendance. The ceremony was simple, the bride wearing a blue dress Martha had helped her make, carrying wildflowers gathered that morning. Henry had purchased a new shirt and suspenders for the occasion, his usually unruly hair neatly combed beneath his good hat. Their wedding night was spent in the best room of Salem's small hotel, where they discovered each other with tenderness and growing passion. Katherine had never imagined such intimacy could exist between 2 people, not just the physical joining, but the complete trust she felt in Henry's arms, the sense that she had truly found her home. The journey back to Montana was different from the wagon train that had brought her west. They traveled by stagecoach where possible, by horseback where necessary. Henry ever attentive to Katherine's comfort and safety. Along the way, they learned each other's stories more completely. Henry's childhood in Tennessee, his reluctant service in the Confederate Army at barely 17, his wandering years after the war. Katherine shared memories of her father, her dreams for the future, her secret fear that she wasn't brave enough for the life they were choosing. You're the bravest woman I've ever known, Henry told her, his arm around her as they camped beneath the stars one night. Not because you're not afraid, but because you face your fears head-on. By the time they reached Utica, Montana in late November 1876, Katherine felt as though she had known Henry all her life. The small frontier town was much as she remembered from passing through with the wagon train, a collection of wooden buildings along a dusty main street, with the mountains rising majestically in the distance. They stayed at the town's only hotel while Henry finalized the purchase of the land he had described to her. When he returned from meeting with the land agent, his face was alight with satisfaction. It's ours, he told her, sweeping her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the floor. 160 acres of the finest grazing land in the territory. The next day, he took her to see their new home. The journey from Utica took several hours on horseback, following a winding trail that eventually opened onto a vista that took Katherine's breath away. Rolling grassland stretched before them, dotted with stands of pine and bisected by a clear running creek. In the distance, snow-capped mountains formed a majestic backdrop against the azure sky. "It's exactly as you described it," Katherine said, awe in her voice. Henry pointed toward a hollow near the creek. "The cabin's just down there, sheltered by those trees." The cabin was indeed small, just 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, but solidly built of local pine logs. The previous owner had left basic furniture: a table and chairs, a bed frame, a chest for storage. It was primitive compared to her uncle's comfortable farmhouse in Oregon, but Katherine could immediately envision how it could become a home. "We'll add to it come spring," Henry promised, watching her reaction carefully. "Another room, perhaps, a proper kitchen." "It's perfect," Katherine assured him, meaning it. "We'll make it ours together." The winter of 1876-77 tested their resolve and their marriage. Montana winters were harsher than anything Katherine had experienced in Missouri or Oregon. Snow piled deep around the cabin, and temperatures fell so low that water froze in the bucket by the fire. Yet there was beauty in the crystalline landscape, in the way frost painted delicate patterns on the window glass, in the absolute silence that fell after a snowfall. They developed routines that carried them through the dark months. Henry would rise before dawn to tend the small herd of cattle. He had purchased 10 cows and a bull, the beginning of what he hoped would become a prosperous operation. Katherine kept the cabin, learned to cook on the temperamental fireplace, and began piecing quilts from fabric she had brought from Oregon. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, Henry whittling or mending tack while Katherine sewed or read aloud from one of the few books they owned. Sometimes they simply talked, making plans for the spring, sharing memories, or dreaming of the future. Other nights, they would retreat early to their bed, finding warmth and comfort in each other's arms. By February, Katherine knew she was carrying their first child. "Are you happy about it?" she asked Henry after telling him the news, uncertain of his reaction to a baby arriving when they were still establishing their homestead. His response was to gather her close, his hand gentle against her still flat abdomen. "More than I can say," he whispered against her hair. "You've given me everything I never dared hope for, Katherine." Spring came late to the high country, but when it arrived, it transformed their land with explosive growth and color. Wildflowers carpeted the grasslands, the creek ran full with snowmelt, and new calves wobbled alongside their mothers. As Katherine's pregnancy progressed, Henry hired 2 local men to help with the ranch work, and to build the promised addition to the cabin a proper bedroom, and an expanded kitchen with a cast-iron stove that was hauled all the way from Utica by wagon. Word of the Prescott Ranch spread through the territory. Henry's knowledge of cattle and land management, combined with Katherine's organizational skills and hospitality, made them successful despite their modest beginnings. Neighbors from miles around would stop by when passing, knowing they would find good coffee and conversation at the Prescott place. Their son, Joseph Holloway Prescott, was born on a crisp October day in 1877, with the assistance of a midwife from Utica and Henry, who refused to leave Katherine's side despite the midwife's protests that men had no place in a birthing room. "I'm not leaving my wife," he had stated firmly, his hand steadfast in Katherine's as she labored. Holding their son for the first time, Katherine looked up at Henry's awestruck face and knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice in returning to Montana with him. The years that followed brought both joys and hardships. The winter of 1878 was particularly brutal, with temperatures so low that even the hardy Montana cattle suffered. They lost nearly a third of their herd despite Henry's best efforts to protect them. That spring, they had to rebuild almost from scratch, Henry working from dawn until well past dusk to ensure their survival. "We'll get through this," Katherine assured him during those difficult days, their son on her hip and determination in her eyes. "We're stronger together." And they were. By 1880, the Prescott Ranch had expanded to 300 acres, with a herd of 50 cattle and several fine horses. Their cabin had grown into a proper house with 4 rooms and a front porch where Katherine would sit on summer evenings, watching Henry teach young Joseph to ride his pony in the yard. Their daughter, Martha Elizabeth, joined the family in the spring of 1881, a delicate beauty with her father's dark hair and her mother's blue eyes. Henry proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband, balancing the demanding work of the ranch with time spent with his children. In the summer of 1883, 7 years after Katherine had been accidentally left behind at Holloway's trading post, they hosted a gathering at the ranch to celebrate their success and to thank those who had helped them along the way. Neighbors from miles around attended, as did Katherine's aunt, uncle, and cousins, who made the journey from Oregon specially for the occasion. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Katherine found herself standing with Henry at the edge of the gathering, watching their children play with their cousins near the creek. "You ever regret it?" Henry asked unexpectedly, his arm around her waist. "Coming back here with me instead of staying in Oregon?" Katherine looked up at him, this man who had crossed territories to find her, who had worked alongside her to build a life and a home against all odds. "Never," she said with absolute conviction. "Not for a single moment." Henry's smile was no longer the rare sight it had been when they first met. 7 years of happiness had softened the hard edges of the solitary cowboy, though the strength and integrity that had first drawn Katherine to him remained unchanged. "That day at Holloway's trading post," he said reflectively, "when I saw you standing there, left behind by your wagon train, I had no idea my life was about to change forever." "Nor did I," Katherine admitted. "I was so focused on catching up to my family, on the life I thought I was supposed to have in Oregon. I never imagined that being left behind would lead me exactly where I was meant to be." Henry drew her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It seems sometimes the wrong turns lead us to the right places." As the stars appeared one by one in the vast Montana sky, Katherine leaned into her husband's embrace, surrounded by the life they had built together. From a chance meeting at a trading post to a thriving ranch, from strangers to beloved partners, their journey had been unexpected but undeniably right. And in the end, being left behind had led her home.